Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Famous and Gravy early and ad-free now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Famous and Gravy, biographies from a different point of view. To participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. Now here's the quiz to reveal today's dead celebrity.
This person died 2021, age 87. As a teenager, she typed out chapters from Hemingway novels to see how they worked. She was deeply influenced by Hemingway's handling of dialogue and silence. Joseph Conrad was another formative influence.
Well, it must be a writer.
Nora Ephron.
Oh my God, I'm trying to Agatha Christie.
Not Agatha Christie. Good guess. All right. Her attraction to trouble spots, disintegrating personalities, and incipient chaos came naturally.
Oh, the mom, Debbie Reynolds.
Susan Sontag?
Not Susan Sontag, but you are in the right ballpark. She came to prominence with a series of incisive searching feature articles in Life magazine and the Saturday Evening Post that explored the fraying edges of post-war American life.
My brain is like stuck.
I feel like I should know who this is, but I don't know who this is.
Jackie Collins?
Not Jackie Collins, who I don't know if she's alive or dead, but I thought about her for the show. I need to verify her current status. All right. Her early essays include Slouching Towards Bethlehem, 1968, and The White Album, 1979.
Oh, Joan Didion.
It's got to be Joan Didion.
Why do I want to say Joan Didion?
Today's dead celebrity is Joan Didion.
What? Are you kidding me?
But you are, to go to a dinner party with you, there's no one who's more interesting to be there than you. You'll express your opinions. You'll tell people what you think. Well, you've never had a problem telling people what you think.
No, but that's because you asked me.
Of course I do. I'm sitting next to you. That's right. There's also this. You don't look like a killer.
No, I don't.
You don't. But when you put pen to paper, watch out. Yes?
Well, to some extent, I mean, it's not hostile. It's more in sorrow, usually.
In sorrow?
Yeah, I mean, more.
Because you feel compelled to say what you think, and that's what it's about.
Yes.
Welcome to Famous and Gravy. I'm Michael Osborne.
And my name is Alice Florence Orr.
And on this show, we choose a famous figure who died in the 21st century, and we take a totally different approach to their biography. What didn't we know? What could we not see clearly? And what does a celebrity's life story teach us about ourselves? Today, Joan Didion died 2021, age 87. I am thrilled today to be joined by Alice. She is a podcast critic and managing editor of Podcast Review, which is an online magazine posting interviews, lists, and reviews of podcasts. And I would say above all else, you are a student of spoken word content. I am curious to know, do you see yourself in Joan Didion?
That's a fascinating question. Firstly, I'm thrilled to be here. This has been a long time coming. Is there a connection? Well, I think for me, I got into audio because I was studying English literature. And one of the things that I listened to all the time was essays from Joan Didion. I think there is so much to be enjoyed as a textual experience, but certainly hearing them is no small thing. It's a really impressive way that she commands language, and it translates really well into audio as well.
Was she the voice on these essays that you would read?
No, there's actually one audio actor who does a lot of audiobooks in this kind of genre and category. She does some of the audiobooks for people like Rachel Kushner and things like that. So I became very familiar with this one audiobook narrator. And what's been really nice about leaving university now and working in criticism is that I get so much inspiration from the fact that she works across different mediums. She was a novelist. She also was really passionate about criticism. I really enjoy how both she and Hemingway and all these other kind of people coming out of modernism and going into the kind of postmodern new journalistic impulse have this crossover between journalism and fiction and high literary writing. I find that so fascinating.
We're going to step on too much of this if we don't get going, so let's just dive in.
I am so ready.
Category 1, grading the first line of their obituary. Joan Didion, whose mordant dispatches on California culture and the chaos of the 1960s established her as a leading exponent of the new journalism, and whose novels Play It As It Lays and A Book of Common Prayer proclaimed the arrival of a tough, terse, distinctive voice in American fiction, died on Thursday at her home in Manhattan. She was 87. Alice, your reactions?
I might be biased here, but I do think that it doesn't really get much better than this, to be honest.
Oh, interesting.
Well, a long life and a sort of rock and roll life, despite the fact that maybe in her own view, she didn't consider herself to be a rock and roll figure, more like somebody who was around rock stars or was in proximity to famous people.
Yeah.
But if anything, I think that certain adjectives here, tough, terse, it certainly paints a picture of somebody who, when you compare that to her physical image, very different. It's not what you would expect. And I think if you kind of zoned out a little bit and didn't really know who this person was, the picture that is painted here is antithetical to maybe who she actually was in real life, which I kind of also enjoy. The sort of juxtaposition is interesting.
I totally agree. I mean, I do feel like tough, terse, distinctive gets at a certain fiery quality. Mordant dispatches, I had to look up the word mordant.
Me too.
It's having or showing sharp or critical quality, biting. That's a great word. I love that this showed up in Joan Didion's first line. And then leading exponent. Exponent, I had to look this one up too. A person who believes in and promotes the truth or benefits of an idea or theory. That's the definition. That's like also totally perfect.
It's completely accurate.
So your reaction is like you mostly love it. Mordant, exponent, tough, terse, distinctive voice. Like all these things are like really working for you. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. If I had any, I gave a 9 out of 10. If I had any criticism for it, I would say that it is a bit of a jumble of words to an extent, but this is the New York Times we're talking about, and they do prefer a little bit of a jumble in their first lines, so I forgive them.
Okay, so I had one reaction. Let me say this. I knew who Joan Didion was. I had not read her deeply until getting ready for this episode. So what I have read now is the White Album, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and I had read Year of Magical Thinking in the past. None of those books are brought up here. And that actually sort of surprised me. I would have said, if there's one book you might know her for, I probably would have gone with The Year of Magical Thinking. And I feel like that's a book that has come up in conversations about loss and grief. I went to Goodreads. There are the most reviews for Year of Magical Thinking as number 1. 2 is Slouching Towards Bethlehem. 3 is the White Album. And 4 is Play It As It Lays. So they characterize it well. Mordant dispatches on California culture and the chaos of the 1960s. Perfect. She shaped our view of the 1960s. And I love that they pointed to new journalism too. I want to talk about that more in a second. But like, are these the 2 books you would draw attention to?
It's such an interesting way of trying to figure out this problem of exactly what Joan Didion was all about, because she did write across so many different mediums. I mean, as you mentioned, she was also a screenwriter. Yeah. Her first love was fiction, but I think what we actually know her for is her journalism. I studied Play It As It Lays in my master's program. And one of the things, so I've written a little bit about it. And one of the things that was really interesting about the way that my professor interpreted it is that she was like, this is not a particularly great work of fiction, but it is a seminal work of fiction in the sense that it's a very stylistic novel. I don't think people would disagree with that. I think the general consensus is that it's not a masterpiece, but it's a very nice novel, but it's definitely not her best work. I think when you read something like Slouching Towards Bethlehem, you are confronted by the fact that she is at the front of her field here. Whereas I don't get that sense when she's writing fiction.
My primary association with her is in new journalism and is as a nonfiction writer. I think she's done other things, as you pointed to, but what I feel like she's remembered for is memoirs and essays and as a kind of interpreter of culture, which happens in fiction, of course. But I was a little surprised that they didn't call out those books and instead just use general description. New journalism is a term I didn't know until we did the Tom Wolfe episode some time ago. So I went and I looked at Tom Wolfe's obituary. They don't mention new journalism. I looked at Hunter S. Thompson and Norman Mailer, same thing. I looked up Gay Talese, who's also associated, and he's not dead. Good for him. So I don't know. I kind of lingered on that for a second. I think I'm going to go 8 out of 10. And maybe this is just my own bias, but I feel like Year of Magical Thinking, especially, there's something really important to me about that book, that the people I've talked to who have gone through the process of losing somebody close to them and the confusing insanity that surrounds grief, that book holds a special place and does a thing that a lot of other books do not. And I wanted it called out, and I feel like it's maybe more important than these works of fiction that they draw attention to. So I'm giving it an 8 out of 10.
I respect that. I don't know anybody whose life has been changed by Play It As It Lays, but I can think of many, many people who would cite Year of Magical Thinking as one of the most important books they've ever read. So I think I respect that as a take.
Let's get into category 2, 5 things I love about you. Here, Allison and I will develop a list of 5 things that offer a different angle on who this person was and how they lived. If it's okay, I'm going to lead?
Yes.
Okay. I wrote fragmented narrative. This kind of came up a little when we did the Kurt Vonnegut episode. One of the things I loved about Vonnegut was this phrase, unstuck in time, because it aligns with human experience. We are always unstuck in time. We're usually thinking about the past or the future, very rarely the present. And there's something about the way the mind works that is fragmented. And Joan Didion's essays are often written in these sort of fragmented scenes that kind of skip around. But you find structure within them. There's structured meaning out of disarray. It's nonlinear and sort of elliptical, but it feels like inner dialogue, and it mirrors human experience. And I love that style. I think there's something so masterful about her ability to tell a story in fragments.
I find more faded and cracked photographs than I ever again want to see. I find many engraved invitations to the weddings of people who are no longer married. I find mass cards from the funerals of people whose faces I no longer remember. In theory, these mementos serve to bring back the moment. In fact, they only serve to make clear how inadequately I appreciated the moment when it was here. How inadequately I appreciated the moment when it was here is something else that I could never afford to see.
Absolutely. This is one of the things I love about her, is that she has opinions about writing, and she isn't afraid to actually write by exemplifying those opinions.
Hell yeah.
I do think that I read books now and I feel like I'm suffering because I'm being given too much information and I'm being led to places that aren't strictly necessary. It dulls my experience of it. And what Didion was so fantastic at is giving us just enough information, and it's up to us to reorientate ourselves. And so it's a thrilling experience.
Totally. And it credits the reader. Economy and sparseness. I'll give you a micro moment and you can extrapolate the global emotion out of that. Like you're inviting the reader to use their imagination. I can't tell you actually how much fun I had reading her in the lead up to this episode. I wasn't exactly a fan before. I'm absolutely a fan now. She's fabulous.
Well, I think she's also rereadable. You can go back to her and return to her. I think I've read Slouching Towards Bethlehem maybe 4 or 5 times, but if you asked me to kind of pull out something, I'd probably struggle. With Didion, I feel like I am really enjoying the experience of reading her in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's something like then I go on with my life, and then 6 months later or a year later, I return to the same essay and read it again. Like I think I've read her essay on self-respect every year for the last 7, 8 years, and every time I get something else out of it or some sort of reflection on my own life. And it's not necessarily about relatability. She more like draws out interesting facts and interesting discourses about our time and about our human condition through very specific references, whether that's the environment of California or a specific group of people or a politician or something like that. And she just like goes into it and goes into enough detail that you suddenly find yourself reflecting on something, reflecting on the condition of relationships or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that this relates to Mordaunt, perhaps.
Yes, completely.
All right, so what do you got for thing number 2?
For thing number 2, goodness. There's so many things about her, but I really love that she was influenced by Hemingway. I think people often hold up Hemingway as being this sort of exemplary masculine figure.
Right.
And I think that's true to an extent, but as you know, we've talked about before, I think you can definitely complicate that. I watched an amazing Ken Burns documentary. Are you a Ken Burns fan?
I am. I was not a diehard fan until I watched his Vietnam series, but yes is the short answer.
I mean, his war documentaries are obviously great, but I really recommend his 5-part series on Hemingway because it reveals so much about this person who really influenced Didion in a way that I don't think is really discussed even on English courses. You know, towards the end of his life, he was, you know, a lot more genderqueer than maybe we would previously have thought of. And I think
I've heard this, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting to think when we think of somebody as being influenced by Hemingway, we have a really, like, a tough, terse picture of what that influence means, but...
Yeah. A sort of conventional masculinity in some sense.
Exactly. And so we think, oh, Joan Didion was a masculine writer or she was a woman working in a masculine space. But I think it's always more complicated than that.
Yeah, I don't read her that way. There is, and you turned me on to that, what's it called? Super Context podcast?
Super Context, yeah.
They had some interesting dialogue about how she is read through the lens of a woman writer. And I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm not sure I even have the vocabulary or acumen to speak to it, but I don't see her writing as gendered in either direction. It's not a useful framework with which to interpret her. Do you know what I mean?
Completely.
Even though I think that she is a woman working in a male-dominated industry, I think to say you need to understand the perspective of a woman through this lens or something actually misses the point of her incisiveness. Or even to describe her as feminine or masculine is actually not doing much work. The lineage with Hemingway is more on what we're already speaking to, the sort of like sparseness and like say only what you need and very well edited micro moments that speak to the global.
I don't know if you know this, but apparently the way that she would write every day is she would start by sitting down. She had a pretty regular schedule, like a kind of 9 to 4 writing schedule.
Yeah, she was regimented. Yeah.
She would sit down and she would type out everything that she'd written the previous day and then start writing at the end. Isn't that crazy?
That's perfect. That leads me to my thing number 3. My thing number 3 I love about her is her idiosyncratic habits and rituals. So
she was neurotic, absolutely.
She was neurotic. She's freaking crazy, and I absolutely love it. So there is this thing that was in the quiz that she typed out Hemingway to see how it worked. Like she's actually like transcribing to understand the mechanics of language.
I taught myself how to type by typing out Hemingway sentences over and over again.
Looking for
just how they worked, because they appeared to be so simple, but you would come away from a string of them with this overwhelming feeling of, you know what was going on. It was a withholding. There was withheld information in these sentences, and it had to do with a rhythm. I mean, I can't exactly explain it.
But you got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There is a kind of like muscle memory thing she does where she's warming up her fingers to write out the thing that she wrote before just to sort of ramp up the mind. I love that habit. I read somewhere she did 5 cigarettes a day.
Yeah,
5 cigarettes.
Just 5.
Mm-hmm. What a, like, that's crazy. I'm a former smoker and I don't know how anybody does that. I love this thing about she lived off practically Coca-Cola and salted almonds for breakfast.
You know what? At a bar, a Diet Coke and some salted almonds.
That sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. My favorite one, though, and this came up in the documentary that her nephew, Griffin Dunn, directed and put together. When she was stuck with a manuscript, she would put it in the freezer. Literally put it in the freezer. I think that that is I'm frozen, I'm stuck, I'm going to let it freeze and I'm going to thaw it. These idiosyncratic habits, I think that they're important. I believe so strongly in daily rituals. And the more I have quirky, weird little things that I do in my day that speak to the creative process and that put me in touch with my own creativity, I think those things really matter. That's my thing number 3 that I love about Joan Didion.
I think it's just marvelous. I think
it totally paints a picture of a certain kind of person too. It is neurotic, but it's important. And I guess that's my point. You know,
I think we all try to be way too normal these days.
Right.
Way too normal.
And, you know, it's almost like permission for weirdness.
Something I've noticed about like people my own age is that we will cosplay, so to speak, as people who have these idiosyncrasies. Like we will put on clothes in the style of to dress up as, but in our own lives, we are so hell-bent on micromanaging our own chaos.
Yeah.
We just want to be normal and we just want to be, you know, healthy and perfect and whatever. And I just think there is a line between when your personality is moving into an unhealthy space. But I really think that something like drinking a Diet Coke and eating almonds for breakfast, sure, that could be disordered 100%. And I can recognize that, especially because of my background.
It may speak to a problem, yeah.
Exactly. The thing is like human beings aren't perfect. And I think for a writer, you recognize that in yourself first.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this comes up in her essay on self-respect. I really recommend people reading it, but I think
that's a great essay. This is like Vogue in the early 60s. This was like almost a big break kind of essay, right?
Completely.
Well, okay, so wonderful. Do you have a thing number 4?
Yes.
Okay.
I love that she was also can be considered as a travel writer, a writer of vignettes and dispatches. This is something that I don't hear talked about as much, especially because she was such a California quote unquote writer, but she traveled to all these different places and wrote really compelling essays. She went into the politics of a place. She went into, you know, even just local politics and understanding the way in which a place is constructed and the problems within it and especially the contradictions and the ironies and things like that.
I had something really similar to this. I actually said a bubble popper in terms of how she captures a sense of place. This was, I think it's very true in Slouching Towards Bethlehem when she writes about Haight-Ashbury in 1967 or writing about Hollywood. She builds a world and then dismantles it. I really love when she writes about California. She has this quote, "The apparent ease of California life is an illusion, and those who believe the illusion to be real live here in only the most temporary way." When I lived in California, in Palo Alto, my wife and I used to make this joke, like, because Palo Alto, the weather is unbelievable. And we're like, "What's the forecast today?" And we'd say, "Perfect, with a 20% chance of transcendence." I think that what a great travel writer does is set the scene so that they're almost like invoking a pre-existing mythology, but then pierce through it and say, that's not really real. Here's what's even more real. And she had an extraordinary talent at that.
You're completely right. It almost feels like she writes about California as an ecosystem.
Yes. Yeah.
Because she has to incorporate the nature and the wind system and the way that the water flows and the hostile environment that California is, you know, the fault lines, obviously the most recent fires being awful and this constant threat of almost annihilation.
Yeah, the environmental destruction and the way it looms, and that stands in sharp contrast to this image of it as a sort of Eden.
It's just a really interesting place.
It is. And if you're going to live there, you have to read Didion.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to give my thing number 5. Great stories happen to those who can tell them. She has a kind of foresight. I mentioned a second ago some of the essays in Slouching Towards Bethlehem, the darker side of Haight-Ashbury. I mean, that scene of like seeing a 5-year-old on acid, and what does that mean? There was like, she understood the significance of how misguided it all was.
What was it like to be a journalist in the room when you saw the little kid on acid?
Well, let me tell you, it was gold. The long and the short of it is, you live for moments like that if you're doing a piece, good or bad.
Her writing on the Central Park Five, she identified something way ahead of time. It's almost like a true crime story. I also love that Harrison Ford and some of the movie directors of the 1970s were hanging around her house before they had hit it. It's so cool. Like she is in very cool company. I just love the fact that Harrison Ford worked on her house as a carpenter before Star Wars came along.
I was a carpenter to do a renovation expansion of their home in Malibu overlooking the ocean. And I spent a couple of months there in their house every day, first thing in the morning, last thing. I think I became their carpenter for the same reason I became their friend, is that I was out of my depth. Didn't know where I was going, how I got there. I always felt that everyone there was smarter than I was and more cultured than I was. But I was always made to feel welcome and comfortable.
There's an adage out there, great stories happen to those that can tell them. That's the kind of quality that has a kind of positive feedback loop around it that can guide careers if you are a storyteller.
Completely. I think there's also, it's very interesting to kind of strike a bit of a difference between, the set that she was hanging around with at home versus some of her reporting assignments. This was something else that the excellent episode of Super Context points out, that she was almost a little bit staid in a way, or conservative with a small c to a certain extent. I don't know if you've ever read The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
I have not.
It's a famous Scottish novel, but basically Miss Jean Brodie collects a set of sort of wayward girls.
I should have said earlier, you're Scottish. I'm not sure. I
am Scottish.
Anyway,
okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, they won't be able to work it out. But in this novel, it's a schoolmistress who collects a set of sort of wayward girls. She calls them her Brodie's set. And I often think about that in relation to Didion, because it does feel like she's almost collecting kind of wayward people around her without ever really descending into that herself. Like, she's very careful about what she reveals about herself.
What I feel like you're getting at is a little bit her powers of observation, which are extraordinary. Exactly. And that she knows how to get the right level of proximate to make conclusions without becoming too involved in them. She's got boundaries.
Self-respect.
Self-respect. Yeah, no, and I mean, it's an interesting question about her. Where did that self-assuredness come from? There's a real confidence, and maybe that has a relationship to neuroses.
Well, sometimes I wonder if it's her. She has a kind of, when you read, I think it's the White Album, she has a real rejection towards like psychotherapy. Well, I mean, sometimes I wonder if a certain level of that self-respect or that self-assuredness comes from a lack of introspection. Like, I'm not willing to, I can criticize her to an extent, because I think that when you come from maybe like a recovery background or something like that, you are constantly self-analyzing and looking inwards and trying to understand why you do certain things. And I think for her to sort of sit there and drink her Diet Coke and her 5 cigarettes and her almonds and say that she has self-respect, I think that comes from either she's transcended all laws of nature, or perhaps she's slightly obstinate in her own understanding of herself. And that's fine. I think that this is maybe why so many people think that she's a masculine writer, because a lot of women's fiction is about that, looking within ourselves to understanding the relationship that we have with our internal and external experience. And she does write. I mean, my number 5 for transparency was that I loved that she would write about her migraines. So, she's not somebody who's unwilling to turn the lens on herself.
But you're right that there is a sort of boundary around self-inspection, and in a way that I find surprising and refreshing on some level.
Completely.
Okay, let's recap. So, number 1, I said fragmented narrative. Number 2, you said Hemingway roots?
Yes, Hemingway.
Number 3, her idiosyncratic habits and rituals. Number 4, travel writer. I amended that with bubble popper. And then number 5, great stories happen to those who can tell them. And we had a bit of an exchange about her introspective qualities. Awesome list. Let's take a break.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
South of Midnight is a third-person action-adventure game set in a version of the American Deep South you've never seen before. When a hurricane rips through Prospero, Hazel is pulled into a magical Southern Gothic world where reality and fantasy are intertwined. Learn the ancient powers of a weaver and face mythical creatures inspired by real folklore as you explore a beautifully handcrafted world featuring a soundtrack inspired by the American South. Unravel the past in South of Midnight. Play now on Xbox Series X and S, Game Pass Ultimate and PC, and Steam. Terms apply. See xbox.com/subscription terms. Rated M for mature.
Category 3, One Love. In this category, Alice and I will each choose one word or phrase that characterizes this person's loving relationships. First, we will review the family life data. So, Joan Didion had one marriage to John Gregory Dunn. He was also a novelist, screenwriter, and journalist. They got married in 1964. Joan was about 29. Their marriage lasted nearly 40 years until John's sudden death in 2003. They were known as a writing couple, and his death is detailed in The Year of Magical Thinking and her experience with grief. There is one adopted daughter. In 1966, they adopted Quintana at birth. Quintana passed away in 2005 at the age of 39 when Joan was 70. So the theme of grief is really present in her latter years. One thing worth knowing is that this is one of those marriages and family lives that people have written books about, like the inside of their relationship. Because I think there was a perception of like finish each other's sentences and real harmony of personalities within the marriage. And then I think other people have looked at closer and seen, real points of contention. And she's got an essay in the White Album where she talks about being in Hawaii on the verge of divorce. What's really interesting is she says in the documentary of Griffin Dunn, John edited that essay where they're talking about being on the verge of divorce, which is like such a, there's something so, I don't know, kind of intimate and disconnected about that.
I had better tell you where I am and why. I'm sitting in a high-ceilinged room in the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in Honolulu. My husband is here and our daughter, age 3. We are here on this island in the middle of the Pacific in lieu of filing for divorce.
Did he read that?
He edited that.
He edited.
We thought generally that you used your material. You wrote what you had, and that was what I happened to have at the moment.
All right, so what did you go with for One Love here? I'm dying.
Well, I found this to be the most intimidating category because you were like, oh, it's going to be some metaphor or something like that. I was like, I can't do that, I'm afraid. Nothing really springs to mind. I was inspired by a line that Hilton Als, who is a critic that very often writes introductions for Didion's work. Okay. I was inspired by a line that they wrote where they described Didion as a carver of writing in the granite of the specific. I thought that was a very astute line. So because I feel like so much of her work, especially her later work, is about almost like memorialization. Yeah. I decided to say that she is a memorial carver.
Oh, nice, Alice. Yes, no, you rose to the occasion with this category, memorial carver. That is really well put. I love this imagery of granite. I love its association with the Sierra Nevadas and California, and I love it like her solid foundation-ness. And I certainly love the idea, people use this metaphor a lot, of like you see the thing in the marble or in the granite and you carve around it. Memorial captures both the grief, but also her ability to establish place, like there's a memorialization of time and of space. I think that's perfect.
I think sometimes when you write, you're writing almost like you're building a tomb for somebody.
Huh.
It's where they will be contained forever, at least in your own understanding of them. And also when you write about someone, you fix them in time.
Mm-hmm. Jesus, that's great, Alice. All right, memorial carver. All right, I'll go tell you the mortifier. It's interesting because mine in some ways stands in contrast, but has some similarities. So I was listening to this Alan Watts meditation the other day, and he was talking about how he was kind of pushing on the question of what makes you, you. And we are not our bodies, we are a process. And the metaphor he uses, like imagine you're walking by a river and you see a whirlpool. We recognize that whirlpool as a feature, but at any given moment, the water molecules are never the same water molecules. So it's almost like life is more like a process than a noun. So I liked that, and I'm going to do something adjacent to a whirlpool. I'm going to go with standing wave. Here's where I took this. So a standing wave, the physics of it are it's shaped by equal and opposing forces. One part of the wave is higher than the other. It's like a whirlpool. It's a feature you can see. I think Joan is a little bit above John. I think that there's a bit of a disparity in terms of astuteness and quality. I think that it looks sort of like a stable feature from the outside looking in, but there's unbelievable amounts of emotion just under the surface. So people see this strong marriage power couple, but inside there's strife and a bit of an arrangement of sorts. I think it's also rhythmic, but restless. I see a certain restlessness in Joan Didion. And maybe the key thing is when John dies, the wave collapses. The standing wave disappears when the current stops. And so it's almost like the whole thing was sustained by, collaboration, stress. And just a quick coda, her first book is called Run River. Apparently she did not care for that title, but I was looking for a river metaphor. So Standing Wave, that was my one love.
I think that's excellent. I mean, so often we think about ourselves now as being just a series of individuals. And we are I think, especially, younger people are so kind of apprehensive towards the idea of artistic collaboration or relying on somebody as being a muse. I think we're very suspicious of that because it's gone wrong on so many levels, especially in terms of power dynamics. You think about Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath.
Yeah.
You just think that's a horrible creative relationship.
Yeah.
And yet you could definitely say that they inspired each other. Like a lot of their work came out of that relationship, but we would call it, in today's parlance, very toxic.
Right.
And so I think thinking about Didion and Gregory Dunn, you're just sort of like, you want to be like, ooh, was it bad?
Well, I mean, the question is, how do you sustain
I don't think
conflict?
It was.
No, I mean, I think that if you're going to be creative partners, there is a little bit of a question of how do you sustain conflict, right? And what does healthy, sustained conflict look like? And that is the inside of, most healthy marriages. It's never serene. It's never peace. There's always strife. There's always disagreement. I mean, he was apparently prone to rage. He did not sound like an easy character. He was a gossip and he's a personality and he's an interesting guy in his own right. But I do think a lot of her success stems from their creative partnership. There is something about the standing wave idea, I hope, that gets at that sustained conflict and maybe even respectful conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. That was fun. Good metaphors. All right. Let's go on to category 4, net worth. In this category, we will each write down our numbers ahead of time and we will talk a little bit about our reasoning. We'll then look up the net worth number in real time to see who's closest. And finally, we will place this person on the Famous and Gravy net worth leaderboard. I did not think too much about this. I figured, okay, she's a successful writer for all of her career. She is in Hollywood, and it sounds like doing pretty well. I also wanted her to have more money than Tom Wolfe. Why? So I looked at Tom Wolfe's net worth, and it was $20 million. And so I wanted to go a little bit above that, but not way above that. So how'd you think through this category, Alice?
So I have, when I'm asked questions, ridiculous questions like these, I have certain milestones that help me rationalize certain things. So I think that The Great Gatsby is 64,000 words. So when I think about word counts, I think, 64,000, that's The Great Gatsby.
Okay.
With net worth, I think about Dan Brown.
Okay.
And Dan Brown, I think, is worth upwards of 200 million.
Gotta be. I mean, those books have been turned into movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Didion is interesting because she obviously did write on some movies, and I know just because I was looking at her IMDb page that I think she was a writer on both of the A Star Is Born movies.
I wasn't clear on the crediting of that. So there's a reimagining of the 1970s version of A Star Is Born, because it actually predates that, but they update it into a rock and roll context with Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand. But she is also credited on the Lady Gaga Bradley Cooper version. Yeah, and I wondered if there wasn't some kickback there.
I don't know. I started off at a much lower number, and this is actually what I would consider to be an elevated number.
Okay, so enough tension. Let's reveal. Alice Florence Orr wrote down at $10 million.
Yeah.
Sorry, $10 million, American dollars.
Michael Osborne wrote down a whopping $22 million.
I had to be more than Tom Wolfe. The actual net worth for Joan Didion, $5 million. You're closer. I suck at this category. All right. She was...
that was my original guess,
Is
Michael. And then you were like, oh, she's got to be worth more than Tom Wolfe. And I freaked out. But then I forgot the very important fact that Tom Wolfe is a man. So, of course, he has more money than her.
I should have factored in the patriarchy. All right. So I'm going to place Joan Didion.
I actually really like Tom Wolfe.
I do too. So that places Joan Didion in the bottom 90th percentile of Famous and Gravy, but she is in proud company. So $5 million also shares with Yogi Berra, Fred Willard, Paul Rubens, and Oliver Sacks. That's Pee Wee Herman and Oliver Sacks. Wow. I'm going to say one more thing to just justify my ego. She was doing Celine advertisements late in life. And I kind of thought there might be a nice paycheck from that.
You think people get paid in the fashion industry?
Clearly, you're more well-informed on this than I am, which is why you got a lot closer to the number than I estimate. Well, let me say I just wanted her to have more. But I'm sure.
I wanted her to have more, too.
5 million. God, I got to get better at this category. I need to work on it. All right. Category 5. Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
They're the Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
Yeah, the Achievers.
Yes, and proud we are of all of them.
In this category, we each choose a trophy and award a cameo, an impersonation, or some other form of a hat tip that shows a different side of this person. This was hard.
Agreed.
What do you have here?
I have as I mentioned earlier, Rachel Kushner. An essayist, a novelist. I don't love her novels, but I think she writes incredibly good essays. I highly recommend reading her collections. But I was reading one shortly after I had been reading Didion, and I realized that she makes reference to Didion in one of her essays, and I wanted to read it because I think it's fascinating. This isn't a direct quote, this is my summation. So in the last collection of Kushner's essays, she mocks Didion's error in calling Jim Morrison's trousers vinyl, when it was obvious, even for a Berkeley debutante, that's a quote, that they were actually black leather. Records are made out of vinyl, Kushner moans, not Morrison's pants. Wow. She seems to think that it was a deliberate obstinacy rather than an error of recall that made Didion call them black vinyl pants 3 times in the White Album. Strange, I think, considering Kushner says only a few lines later that she prefers her memories fragile and impermanent. She likes them delicate, likes them prone.
All right.
But for some reason, she can't get over the fact that Joan Didion can't remember or can't realize that Jim Morrison wore leather pants.
I'm speechless. I don't know how to respond to this. What does this mean to you?
Well, again, coming back to this idea that maybe she was a little bit prissy to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And the people that she was hanging out with weren't her people. I wonder if there's a certain level of what Kushner is accusing her of is creating a deliberate separation through language. I agree with Kushner that Didion almost certainly knew that they were black leather and that this particular detail is something that she chose to change. Didion is trying to kind of distance herself from people who run in these circles because she's not that person. She sticks to her 5 cigarettes and her almonds and she doesn't stray past that. And yeah, I just thought it was something that I've thought about for a long time, that little reference, because yeah, I think Didion was a little bit prissy, and I kind of like her for that.
Okay, so for My Little Lebowski, I love her ancestral connection to the Donner Party. So her mother's ancestors, the Cornwalls, had gone west in 1846 on an ill-fated troop of settlers known as the Donner Party. Everybody knows this story. They get stranded in the Sierras and they become cannibals. The Cornwalls split from the group at Nevada's Humboldt Sink to head north, and it's a decision that may have saved their lives. The rest of the Donner Party ate each other up in the Sierra Nevada. Here's why I love it. We spoke about it earlier, the mythology of California. I love that Joan Didion has deep roots, that her family just missed one of the most famous moments of cannibalism, certainly in American history. And that there is this idea of going west until we run out of land, that I feel like part of the reason she has authority in speaking to the California mythology is that I think it informed her culture and upbringing and childhood in Sacramento, and I think gives her an unparalleled lens. I mean, there's some things in her writing about how she will establish the narrative and then dispel it, and she even comes to recognize it operating in herself.
I think that speaks to a certain level of authenticity that I thought we'd got rid of in the postmodern era, but here we are.
Here we are. Okay, good one.
So I just used NerdWallet's card finder tool to find a better card for me. And listeners, this is genius. All you have to do is answer a few questions, and in minutes, you'll get matched with recommendations tailored to you. I'm discovering cards I didn't even know existed, and the matching was on point. The best part? No research needed. The nerds already did that for us. So if you, like me, want to easily find the right card for you, go to nerdwallet.com to get matched today. Terms and conditions apply. Credit products subject to lender approval. See nerdwallet.com for details.
Why are there ridges on Reese's peanut butter cups? Probably so they never slip from her hands. Could you imagine? I'd lose it. Luckily, Reese's thought about that. Wonder what else they think about. Probably chocolate and peanut butter.
Category 6, words to live by. In this category, we each choose a quote. These are either words that came out of this person's mouth or was said about them. This was hard because there's way too much to work with. We haven't even mentioned the phrase, what is the famous phrase in the White Album? We tell stories in order to live?
We tell stories in order to live.
Yeah, it's interesting how that one gets interpreted, misinterpreted. It's sort of amazing that we've gone this far into the episode without making reference to it because it's so associated with her.
Completely.
Yeah.
I feel like the discourse on that has kind of not exhausted, because I don't think that good literature can ever be exhausted, but I think there's so many really interesting interpretations out there. Part of what she writes is about trying to understand like the shifting phantasmagoria
of
I love
that
life.
phrase, yeah.
It's so interesting. And almost she's kind of critiquing her own approach. She's saying that, what I'm trying to do is almost impossible.
I mean, I think what I take from it, there's almost always some narrative operating that we're not aware of, that we have to have in order to delude ourselves into a sense of security. And that what she does as a bubble popper, to use my words, is sort of pierce that narrative and it all falls apart, but then something has to be reassembled. I mean, that's how I interpret that. I don't think either of us went that direction with words to live by. So what do you have here?
Well, I've referenced it so much that I had to take a
self-respect
line out of on self-respect. Exactly.
Yeah.
To do without self-respect, on the other hand, is to be an unwilling audience of one to an interminable documentary that deals one's failings, both real and imagined, with fresh footage spliced in for every screening. It's a complicated quote, which is I didn't realize quite how hard it was to read out loud.
All right, make sense of that. I'm not sure I get it.
Something that I think about a lot is the way in which we're constantly trying to curate our lives.
Yeah.
Whether that's through social media or as writers, or this constant need to sort of define who we are through reflecting on our own failings, reflecting on our own issues. There's this really famous, I don't know if you're familiar with Jemima Jo Kirk. She is an actress she was really famously on this TV show with Lena Dunham called Girls.
Oh, sure, yeah.
She was Jessa, I think.
Okay, I do actually remember who that is.
And she was once asked if she had any advice for women who were self-conscious. And she said, I think you're all thinking about yourselves a little bit too much. And I really do think that is essentially what Joan Didion is saying at length in this essay. She's basically saying that if you have self-respect, you do not entertain an audience for your own failings. I think what we're all so obsessed these days with like being 1% better than we were yesterday, or this kind of self-help narrative and thinking about, I got up at 8 today, I should get up tomorrow at 7 because otherwise I'm, going to fail as a person or whatever. And I think what Joan Didion is saying is like, stop being so myopic about your own bullshit and actually go out there and live your life and live authentically to who you are and what the rules of your own life dictate.
When you're speaking a little bit about this process of like excessive introspection, sometimes I feel like my ego is constantly drafting my autobiography, writing pages and tearing it up, right? And like, I think the better version of me is the outward looking one that's not obsessed with that process. I actually also chose something from that essay. And the line I have is, the willingness to accept responsibility for one's own life is the source from which self-respect springs. I like the accept responsibility thing. I feel like part of the problem of being obsessed with your own self-narrative or your own autobiography is that you're actually taken away and distracted from your own behavior and your own decisions and your own choices. And that accepting your side of the street is how you build up integrity. And it's how you arrive at self-respect. I love that we both are drawing from that essay. And the backstory of it, it's really interesting. Joan Didion's in college, and she sends off this like application to Vogue, which winds up being the springboard for her whole career. This particular essay did stand apart from the kinds of things Vogue was writing at the time in 1963.
Do you think people can still have those kind of careers where this is something I hear so much, is people hold up Joan Didion is almost like a Carrie Bradshaw in the sense of like, people just can't believe that you could make a career off of writing essays?
I don't know. I don't think so, only because we do so much more watching and listening than we do reading. I don't know if that's going to change or not, but I do think the spirit of getting the opportunity to flex your muscles if you have young talent at a place that has institutional structure and a clearer editorial vision, I'd like to say in the abstract that's still possible. Whether or not you can specifically get a launch from a magazine and go into essay writing and then nonfiction, screenwriting, and fiction is another matter. I just don't think the media environment supports that. But I do think that if somebody who was born with Joan Didion's talents were born today, I'd like to think that there's still a pathway to fame and glory, or at least,
Yes, I would hope so. It's interesting because I think the fact that writing has almost become this, like, it's much more democratized now. Everybody can kind of write and cultivate their own audience, which is great and fantastic. But I think it means that a lot of writing now, and I kind of alluded to this before, I think people they're not developing their own manifestos. When I think about writers like Hemingway or Gertrude Stein or Didion, I feel like they have a very clear belief in what good writing is.
Yeah, and I see that actually as being, another, adjacent idea to self-respect is self-love. And I do think that one of the problems of the modern media ecosystem and the democratization of content, or however you want to put it, is that we feel drawn towards creating something that grabs attention before we nurture our own talents in solitude and in moments of reflection. And I feel like we need to figure out a way to create those, to use an overused phrase, safe spaces for that kind of nurturing of talent. Her success is a slow build until Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which I think really kind of catapults her to a new level of renown, so that Tom Wolfe is writing about her in books around new journalism and so forth. All right, let's go to category 7, Man in the Mirror. This is a fairly simple category. Did this person like their reflection, yes or no? This is not about beauty, but rather a question of self-confidence versus self-judgment. She's slight. She's very slight. And the almonds Diet Coke thing has me wondering, but she's also beautiful and confident. So I don't know. I was all over the place here. What did you leave?
Well, I can chit-chat on this because I am actually a former anorexic, so I can talk about this very specifically. I'm not in her head. I don't know her, but certainly I think that she complicates, what we understand to be what somebody who would control their weight would do, which is be a very definitive writer and be very clear about her beliefs about herself. We were just talking about On Self-Respect, which is an incredible work where she clearly really knows herself. And yet it's clear that she has certain disordered eating patterns and certain disordered perceptions about herself. And I think this comes down to truly...
So that is clear to you? I wasn't,
for sure. Okay. Absolutely. For me, it comes down to some sort of disordered eating things are socially kind of conditioned. That I don't get that from her. I get this as almost like a sense of it's just one of her neuroticisms. And that is a different kind of eating disorder. And again, I'm not going to say that phrase with a capital E and a capital D. I'm not going to diagnose her. But certainly when I see her, I go, oh, she's got a body like I used to have. And she eats almonds for breakfast and Diet Coke. That's disordered.
There's a relationship with body and nutrition and consumption that what's up? Your mind goes that way.
Completely. And I think it would be difficult to interact with her work without acknowledging that. But at the same time, I don't think it's the most important thing about her work.
No, not at all. But, the question is more about self-reflection, and which is interesting the way it's coming up here. I actually ended up coming down on the side of yes, she did like her reflection, but it's more about... I think what I'm mapping on here is her confidence as a writer, and it's that simple. Yeah. Because beyond that, this category is always a little bit dangerous in how we speculate, but it feels like especially dangerous here. So did you go yes or no? Did you make a call? I'm going to make you make a call.
I said that she was neutral.
Okay. Well, you can't do that. That's the yes or no.
I think that you can have disordered eating patterns without being vain. I also think you can have disordered eating patterns without being neurotic about what your body looks like or what you look like in the mirror, which is something that people don't really talk about too much. I think it is just the same as any other kind of addiction or coping mechanism. So my response to that is I actually think she probably did really like herself. We can try and pathologize it, recognize certain things about myself in her, but fundamentally... I guess, do we give a shit? I don't know.
No, we don't. But we got to do this category on famous and great. So,
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think she was, positive in general.
Excellent. That is an outstanding answer, and thank you for speaking to it. I think it's a really important distinction you're drawing. It brings awareness to it. Okay, category 8, coffee, cocktail, or cannabis. This is where we ask, which one would we most want to do with our dead celebrity? Yeah, I got my answer.
Me too. This is one of the first ones I answered.
Yeah. Well, sorry, where did you go?
I want to drink. I want to have a cocktail and a cigarette at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
on a Wednesday.
Yeah. At
That
an
is the
inopportune
vibe
time.
here.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I actually also went cocktail. I like the idea of a bourbon drink. She seems like a great drinker. Here's where I went with it, though, more specifically. I have an intuition, and I don't know where this is coming from, but that there's a sense of humor in there somewhere. It is rare that you meet somebody with this kind of intellect and incisiveness who doesn't laugh. And if you watch her interviews, every now and then there is laughter. It's not much. She's not a barrel of laughs, but I also think that I feel like you could draw that out in her. I almost went smoking a joint for the same reason, because that one is more, I can just imagine the giggles, and I kind of want to get her into that giggle zone. There's not a lot of humor in her writing overall. And yet I have a suspicion that there is a sense of humor that can be drawn out. And if there's something I kind of want to draw out in her, it's that. So
I love that idea. Yeah, I think she'd be great at a dinner party. I know that's one of those things that people say all the time, but I think she would be great. I want her, Tony Bourdain, at my dinner party.
Right. I totally agree. All right, that brings us to the final category, Category 9, the Vanderbeek. This category is named after James Vanderbeek, who famously said in Varsity Blues,
"I don't want your life."
In that Varsity Blues scene, James makes a judgment that he does not want a certain kind of life based on just a few characteristics. So here, Alice and I will form a rebuttal to anyone skeptical of how Joan Didion lived. I like to start this with a counter argument, and the obvious one is the grief, I think. We haven't really talked about it. Losing her daughter, the worst thing imaginable, is losing a child, and losing John. I mean, I think that not just that he died before her, he died when Quintana was in the hospital, and then she's sort of out of the hospital, and then the circumstances of her death and what was behind it, I mean, are sort of their own story. Having to grapple with that kind of grief, and even I wonder if it wasn't in her head that she had to do it sort of publicly because of who she was and what she did, that it was sort of like there was almost an imposition to write about the grief process. I feel like that took root in her somewhere. So that sucks. I don't want that. What else goes into the counter argument? I don't know. There's actually quite a bit more here to like. I guess this is where I just begin to flip it around. The year, I mentioned this at the top of the episode, the year of magical thinking, the job it does for people who are going through grief, I don't think it helps you make sense. All it does is, as I understand it, is help you see how there is a complete lack of sense to be had, and that actually going crazy is part of the thing, and to give voice and bring somebody into that experience is like, it's such a service. It's such a contribution. So I don't know. I mean, even as I linger on the counter argument, it's almost like she was destined to do that. I mean, I feel like that book, it's almost like she was born to experience it and write it in some level.
I find it very hard to separate Joan Didion from that sadness and from that grief. I think that my comprehension of her is certainly tied up in that.
Yeah.
I think also just finding your life partner can be, I mean, this is a crazy thing to admit, but when I met my life partner, I suddenly started thinking about my own death in a way that I had never contemplated before, because I didn't have any tangible idea of what the rest of my life would look like, because I was just navigating it as a 20-something and just taking every day as it came and whatnot. And then when I met my partner, I was like, oh my God, we're going to be together when the end comes. And I think that's a really dramatic turn of events in your life where you suddenly start thinking not in days, but in decades.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, though, is I think that gets back to the self-respect essay in a way, that understanding life's responsibilities and your participation in the story and accepting responsibilities is the marker of self-respect, and accepting future grief and entanglements and shared destiny is self-love. That's self-respect in fundamental ways. And I feel like that's a journey of adulthood that we all have to go on, or we remain trapped in fear and not in motion. And like, if there's one thing I really love about Joan Didion is that she like takes us through life in a way. She takes us through the mythologies, the stories we tell ourselves, and why those need to be broken apart and reassembled. And that's how the human experience goes. My point about fragmented narrative, that's how it's going to go down and how it's going to feel for forevermore. And grief is coming, and let's go through that too. Love that she made it to 87. I feel like there's something about and it's almost an argument for the Vanderbeek, for why I won her life. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to draw a circle around all of that, because I don't want it to sound corny, but taking us along for the whole human experience, like the service of that is thing number one I would put on why I want this life. What are the other arguments, Alice? Why else would we want Joan Didion's life?
Well, the counter argument to, she had a very sad life, is that she also had a very fun life, and she had a life full of travel and different experiences. Sometimes I think about like writers who are doing this kind of stuff today, and I think of like Michael Lewis or somebody like that, who's really kind of sitting on the edge of these pivotal moments in what we consider to be like, our era now. So, crypto and tech and financial crashes and all these kinds of things. But she was in it in that period that will always be infamous for, and she basically constructed it as something that we hinted at before. She was instrumental in paving our understanding of that era in history. Now that we're looking back at it, 60 years since the day. So I just find that to be an incredibly exciting thing. And I think it speaks not only to a sense of talent, but also a sense of luck.
Yeah.
She was in the right place at the right time, and just so happened, like, great people sometimes have greatness thrust upon them.
Yeah. Great stories happen to those who can tell them. This was my thing number 5.
But you have to grab it. You have to be willing to participate. And I think she was absolutely willing to participate.
There is something about the vehicle of journalism and new journalism in her case that gave her a front row seat to a lot of pivotal and exciting moments throughout a very exciting time with very interesting people. She took advantage of the opportunity, right? And she rode the wave. All right. Is there anything else you'd add to why you should want this life?
I think the final thing I would say is it's just really refreshing to encounter somebody that was so kind of sure of their own convictions.
Yeah.
She wasn't afraid to question certain things, but I do think that she was just very content in herself, content in her talents, and content in her methodologies of writing. And I like that. I like somebody who's declarative.
Yeah, and self-assured. Yeah. Amen.
Completely.
Amen. I think that's great. All right. So let's recap. So number 1, we said taking us through the human experience over the course of a lifetime. That's kind of an incredible number 1, but we'll just linger with it. Number 2, we said the job, the vehicle of new journalism and the opportunity to participate and to ride the wave of opportunity through some of the most fascinating moments of 20th and 21st century life. And number 3, self-assuredness. What a way to go through life, with confidence and in a declarative way. So with that, James Vanderbeek, I'm Joan Didion, and you want my life. Before we get to the speed round, if you enjoyed this episode, if it cheered you up, if it made you think about things, then you've got your phone in your hand. Share it with a friend. Think of somebody in your life that could use a trip down the life of Joan Didion and all the lessons that we can draw from it. All right, speed round. Plugs for past shows. Alice, if people enjoyed the Joan Didion episode, is there anything in the Famous and Gravy archives that you think they might also enjoy?
Well, my personal favorite so far, I really love Paul Newman.
Really?
So
I love that you love the Paul Newman episode.
I'm a huge Paul Newman fan.
Are you?
So
wow.
He's just the epitome. Him and
so cool.
Cary Grant.
Yeah.
Incredible.
If you like Joan Didion.
Have you done Cary Grant?
We haven't. I'm not sure if he's too dead or not, but you and I can talk.
He's too dead. He's never dead in my heart, that's for sure.
If he's kind of alive, we might talk about him. I love that. Episode number 96, a ranch dresser, Paul Newman. Okay, I don't know if this is easy way out or not, but it is sort of in a different category, the Tom Wolfe episode. This is episode 52, Electric Vanities. I mean, I think that there is this story of new journalism, and I think the cross streams between fiction and nonfiction and how we shine light on institutions and on our understanding of history kind of all comes together through this tradition of writers. So, episode 52, Electric Vanities, Tom Wolfe. Here's a little teaser for the next episode of Famous and Gravy. An understated comic actor, he was especially adept at conveying life's tiny bedevilments.
Bedevilments? feel like I'm being bedeviled here.
Yeah, this is a bedeviling experience. Famous and Gravy listeners, we love hearing from you. If you want to reach out with a comment, question, or to participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. In our show notes, we include all kinds of links, including to our website and our social channels. Famous and Gravy is created and co-hosted by Amit Kapoor and me, Michael Osborne. Thank you so much to Alice Florence Orr for guest hosting on this episode. It was produced by Allie Arrazola with original music by Kevin Strang. Thanks, and see you next time. Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app. You can listen to more episodes early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.